Hello and welcome to Indianomics. Our topic today is the developing contradictions in the power sector. This week, two leading brokerages, Credit Suisse and CLSA, said they expect power shortages in the next 4 years, and hence the sector may see fresh capex after a couple of years. This even as at least 40,000 megawatts of private power assets are either languishing as defaulters in the bankruptcy courts or are seeing less than 50% capacity utilization. In October, for the first time in 3 years, power demand in the country grew in double digits. It grew at 10% nationally. Merchant power rates rose by 46% in the month of October, yet none of the private power companies saw any increase in their PLFs, that is, in their capacity utilization. So, will the sector really need more investments when private power companies don't see any capacity utilization worth the name? Why is the sector so loaded against the new private players? To answer these and other questions, we have with us the Power Secretary, Ajay Kumar Bhalla. Welcome, Mr. Bhalla, to the show. Thank you for joining. Well, that's really the first question. In the wake of good demand this quarter, the public sector generating companies have seen utilization go up by 200 to 500 basis points, but the PLFs of private power companies have remained flat. Why?
No, I mean, there are different factors in power sector. I mean, where is that coal linkage? Where do you have the PPAs? And how much, like in central generating station, there is certain unscheduled power, or there is a 15% power of central government. Similarly, state governments may have coal but may not have demand, so then that power gets into exchange. So it depends on coal availability with the IPPs, and if they have, whosoever had coal had come to the exchange, actually, may not be, you're right, may not be in big numbers. But I will go to the other effort which we made to collect or aggregate 2500 megawatt of power, and there people who had coal available with them had come and bid, and we have been able to contract PPAs with the state governments for 3 years term for 1900 megawatt.
Let me just come to the problem of the private power companies, many of whom are on the verge of being dragged to NCLT. It's only the Supreme Court which has stayed that process. Do you see the ability of these power companies, all brand new power companies, to be able to sign FSAs at all? Any move being made by the government?
Yes, I mean, see, government was making different efforts. I mean, the policies which ministry had brought out were the tolling policy for utilization of coal of the distant states in some of these plants. It is happening in by Gujarat in 1 or 2 plants in Chhattisgarh. Then we had allowed them to come in that aggregation model also. And secondly, I mean, some of the plants are getting resolved outside NCLT also. The efforts of the lenders are on. But yes, some of the plants may have to go to NCLT, and there are different reasons. One is the tariff at which they had bid, so they are not able to service the debt. So anybody who picks up that thing, I mean, it cannot service the debt. So somewhere it has to be brought down to a sustainable level. So all these lenders had done the sustainability ratings and all, and they have been doing bidding. I understand that 4 to 5 commissioned plants may be getting resolved, but the ones who are under construction or where the construction had just started and all, and if their economics is not workable now and they're not getting any more loans, or the promoters are not able to infuse equity of their part, naturally, I mean, then a promoter will have to walk out of it, and the process is available under the IBC in the NCLT. So, I mean, let's not look at that very badly. I mean, if commissioned capacities get wasted, we should be really concerned. But most of the commission capacities we should be able to retrieve. But some of the plants where the constructions were at the elementary stage, I don't know. I mean, at NCLT, we'll have to look at that and see whatever is retrievable and all.
Okay, no, I'll tell you where the contradiction is coming from. People are already talking about the need to put in fresh capacity. We had a note recently from CLSA which said that fresh capacity will be needed. A note from Credit Suisse saying fresh capacity will be needed. Isn't it a bit contradicting that people are asking for fresh capacity at a time when there is almost 100,000 megawatts of idle capacity? even not counting the gas-based plants?
Let's see, I mean, it's a matter of appreciation that this fresh capacities which are being talked about is at a later stage, beyond 2022.
Okay.
All this, what we are looking at is the capacities which are under construction now and are a little stressed. But when these get resolved, see in the CA's plan, if about 45,000 megawatt is under construction during this 5-year period, I mean largely central and state, about 8,000 of private sector is also there. And I mean these have been counted in the projection of Central Electricity Authority. Then we have planned to retire the older plants also. About nearly 8,000 megawatt have already been retired. We are looking at a total about 22,000 megawatts to be retired. So these are the capacities which under the plan of Central Electricity Authority, which is available in the public domain, are already there accounted for. So beyond 22 to 27, if unless people talk now and start talking of establishing capacities, we may run short of this thing in 22, 23, 24. I mean those years. So that is what being talked about.
Okay. Well, let me just persist for a bit.
I mean, you
more.
start a power plant today, it will come up 5 years down the line, you know.
Okay. Well, we are perhaps looking at a deficit at that point in time, according to these brokerages. But let me just persist for one last time on this issue. Mr. Bhalla, you know, it is at least about 20,000 megawatts to 30,000 megawatts, which are languishing because they don't have FSAs and PPAs. They are not able to service their debt because they are hardly utilizing any capacity. Now, is there a plan to, you know, somehow retrieve them, either by signing more FSAs and PPAs or by scrapping the older plants at a faster clip?
See, both things we are doing. Under the Shakti policy, FSAs are being made available. Whosoever, I mean, about 10,000 megawatt capacity has been able to avail that coal linkage, and they are now generating and all. So out of that 40,000 odd megawatt, which was initially known as stressed plants, more than about 10,000 has definitely come out of it.
Okay.
And few more, if the bank lenders are able to resolve, will come out of it. Now going to getting more PPAs. Now we are looking at, see, we have discussion with the state governments. We have some hydro projects getting commissioned and which have been contracted in recent times. Some of the hydro projects coming up in Bhutan also will be getting commissioned shortly. So we are selling that power to the DISCOMs. We are tying it up with everybody. And we feel that there is a demand among the distribution companies in the state governments to buy more power, to contract more power. And if you can contract power for 30 years, and hydro power is getting contracted for about 35 years.
Okay.
So we are finding people willing. But, you know, they want a price today. I mean, if I must put a paper on the table saying this is what the 35 years price would look like. And people are willing to sign PPAs. So similarly, I mean, our aggregation model, as I said, there was a demand, but that's a medium-term demand. So maybe, I mean, if the demand trajectory remains, if you have seen the Niti Aayog's GDP growth projection of 8%, we definitely will be needing more power. And I don't see any reason why distribution companies shouldn't be contracting more power. I mean, historically, some of them have the MOU-based agreements lying with some of the central and state generating companies. So that also is available with them. So they have to pick up now and see which one they have to do. On competitive bidding, they can get better price, so they can go for that. Okay. But I mean, may not be today or tomorrow, but definitely a demand scenario is emerging.
Okay, one final question to you, Mr. Bhalla. You know, the state-owned plants like NTPC have an inherent advantage because they have a regulated rate of return on older plants up to 2013. That gives them an unfair advantage. And the second problem that IPPs face is that many incompetent or rather old plants are continued to linger, although there has been some scrappage. Can both these be corrected? Remove the advantage which the regulated return has, and to scrap old plants at a faster clip?
Okay, we are definitely looking at scrapping some of the plants which are inefficient, besides the plants which will not meet the environmental norms. Okay. So these two categories are definitely getting retired. We are any inefficient heat rate plant definitely will be phasing out. In our high-level committee under the Cabinet Secretary, this issue has also been flagged and recommendation has been made to first reduce the coal quantity to inefficient plants to a normative level of heat efficiency, and then phase them out. You know, I mean, if there is economic life left, there are other linkages and all. We are seeing that, And as I said, Central Electricity Authority has placed a plan on the table of 22,000 megawatt to be retired.
Okay.
So you are very right. If we can fast track it, we are looking at the legal processes and other things and how to do it. Regulator definitely has brought out a tariff paper for the next cycle. I am sure, people would be raising this issue you mentioned about NTPC's plans.
All right. We'll see how that gets resolved. At the moment, the regulated return continues. But, of course, that is up for debate. It's a draft rule. Mr. Bhalla, thank you very much for your patience in explaining how probably we are going to see less stress in the power sector. We just spoke with the Power Secretary, Ajay Kumar Bhalla. The key problem of this sector is there are at least 40,000 megawatts of stressed power plants, of which about 20,000 are stressed because they don't have power purchase agreements, and another 11,000 are stressed because they don't have fuel supply agreements with Coal India. About 8,000 megawatts have been sold, or at least attempted to be sold, through the NCLT or through other interbank agreements. But there is still at least 30,000 megawatts of plants that are completed but are not able to function, despite the fact that there is a rise in power prices and a rise in power demand. Let me invite Pramod Dev and Neelkant Mishra to take this discussion forward. Mr. Dev, what is your sense? You have been in a policy-making seat before. How do you think this can be resolved? Can something be done to ensure PPAs are signed for these 20,000 megawatts of power anytime soon?
Well, I am also on this expert committee to frame a bidding document. Originally, we were asked to do for case 2 and all that. And then we were told that for 1900 megawatt, which has been now contracted, we were asked to do for medium term on a war footing. So you can see the response. Now, essentially, electricity continues to be and always will remain a state subject. It's under concurrent list, and it is how the states perceive it. Now you can see that the demand has gone up in the last couple of months, and the reasons are very obvious. There are elections looming. We had elections, so that's one of the political factor which drives demand. Second is also the seasonal thing. As far as the Secretary Power said, that CA's projections are that till 2022, the plants which are under construction should be sufficient to meet the demand. Now, the issue is that since the Prime Minister has promised power to all households, now to what extent the state discoms are implement that? That is the most crucial thing, because they will be supplying power to rural households where the recovery is poor. So, which means they get financially stressed more. But again, one positive thing is that you are going to have elections. Now, if that is the fun factor which drives them, and I think this is what the centre can do, take full advantage of this and start monitoring whether the electricity is being really supplied for how many hours.
Mr. Dev, it's not a question of only supply. They are not getting paid for what they supply. I could rattle off the amount of power theft. States like, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, Jharkhand, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Uttarakhand are all reporting between 20 and 25% AT&C losses. So the more they supply, the more likely are losses to these discoms.
The losses are even more, no? Unless you have a complete agriculture feeder separation and you have a automatic meter reading, you are not going to get the correct figure of what the losses are. So the losses are something which had to be given when you factor in. So when you are buying power, you have to accept that. And as I said, that because of the political reason, the states will be now compelled to buy power. So you can also put some pressure on them and see that they buy more power and it meets both the goals, no? Because that will also give a push to some of these plants which are standard, and then the PPA could be signed.
I'm somehow not finding the answer I want for this. Neelkant, the problem is that, I could play that table again. The amount of dues that private power companies suffer are far higher than NTPC. And even if there is demand, if it is not going to be paid for, then we are really not finding a solution. So my question to you is this. Before we start thinking of putting in fresh thermal power plants, as your report indicated, is there a plan to use the current stranded capacity?
So let me first clarify that we are not sort of recommending that we should put up fresh power capacity. I mean, our job is less prescriptive and more predictive. That we think that as medium-term power tariffs have actually started going up. So if you look beyond the overnight and the daily purchase markets, the spot markets, if you look at the 3-6 month contract prices, they've already started reaching 5-6 rupees a kilowatt hour. Some of it, as you've rightly and Mr. Dev also has said, is political because elections are approaching in the next 6 months, and it will be interesting to see if this persists. But the gist is that shortages are starting to happen, and our thesis, plain and simple, is that the market dynamics will force more capacities to get added. Now coming to the point of, I mean, all the points you've raised are absolutely valid, that there is a shortage of coal. There is also very slow progress on the improving profitability or rather reducing losses of SEBs. But let's put things in perspective. I think the AT&C losses are still unacceptably high in most states, but the average for India has been coming down. So in 2013-14, if we were at 26-27% AT&C losses, we're now talking about 21-22% losses, and then the trajectory is still heading downwards. There is improvement in metering. There is improvement in privatization of distribution in some of the large cities. It's much slower than what we would desire, but it is still happening. As to how and when will the big PPAs start getting signed, I think, we have to look at how economic forces work, because clearly the political will, as we have discussed, is to give more power. And the last time I was on your show, I did mention my own experience of in northeast Bihar, where power was rarely available for more than 7-8 hours. Now we are seeing 23 hours of power and reasonably good quality of power. And therefore, it is very clear that there is a political compulsion now. I don't think state governments can afford not doing that. There is also a fiscal compulsion, because while Uday initially was primarily a financial restructuring program, it did force the state governments to commit to adding their SEB losses to their fiscal deficits. And fiscal deficits, as we've often discussed, are very hard barriers to break because it is constitutionally determined. So therefore, I mean, basically, the central government can use that constitutional power to cap those deficits at 3%. So if your SEB losses are massive, then you have less money to spend elsewhere. So I think that forces the state governments to take steps to accelerate the drop in AT&C losses and also start finding more creative ways to distribute power. All we are saying is that demand is growing at 6%, and it's not just a last 3-month phenomenon. It's been growing through the down cycle. There is improvement in power availability, and if this just trend line is drawn for the next 5-6 years, we are headed into a period where at peak utilizations there will be a shortage of power capacity, and we need to solve that problem. For the FSAs, just to take a minute more, I think the problem is Coal India's monopoly, right? So in 2015, the legal monopoly was unwound. So till 2015, only Coal India could do merchant mining of coal. Now that legal monopoly is gone, but we still haven't issued any merchant mining licenses to private parties. Once you do that, it will take another 4-5 years for the coal to start coming out. But that's increasingly important, especially as domestic energy, because of the rupee weakness, becomes cheaper than imported energy. You need to have a supply response. I mean, if you have a state monopoly, I think the resolution of problems like land acquisition or infrastructure or logistics or getting the right workers, I think all of those issues don't get resolved as fast as they should. What the government has done in the interim is it has allowed some companies that had captive mining licenses to sell 25%, up to 25% of the approved amounts in the merchant market. So there are, I think, at the margin, some solutions starting to come out. but we need much more progress on, and especially I think just issuing commercial mining leases so that at least the supply response on coal starts to happen.
Okay, no, I take your point. Sale of 25% coal, commercial mining licenses, hopefully sooner rather than later, should alleviate some problem. But I want to persist with this supply-demand mismatch yet again. Current installed capacity is 344,000 megawatts. At peak demand, the demand is 173,000 megawatts. So we are still looking at 170,000 megawatts of excess capacity, assuming 70,000 of that is gas-based power plants, which anyway have to be scrapped. We are still looking at a substantial amount of underutilized capacity. And while we are talking about higher utilization in year to date because of election demand or electrification of larger areas, that still is only helping the central and the state-owned GenCos. There has been no increase in the PLF of private power companies. So I want to persist with that question again, Neelkant. Even if the demand cycle, I'm still not able to see how your demand-supply cycle is showing an increase or the need for fresh investment even 4 years down the line, when as much as 100,000 megawatts is hardly seeing any utilization, 50% at max.
Okay, Lada, so okay, if I may try to answer the question. So the of that excess capacity that you see at a headline level, you have to remember that about 70,000 megawatts or 70 gigawatts is solar and wind.
Okay.
Right? Almost by definition, that cannot work at more than 22% PLF. Right? If you look at hydel, there are a few months where they're very active because there's a lot of water. But for most of the rest of the year, they don't really produce that much electricity.
So we are talking about a stress of 40,000 thermal, 40,000 megawatts of thermal, right?
Yes. So we have to talk about how much is the excess capacity in thermal. So in thermal capacity utilization, the utilization levels I think had dropped to 57, 58%, maybe slightly lower. And right now at 62, 63, I think at peak levels they're already at 70%. Now, if you build in 6% growth, it doesn't take rocket science to come to the late 70s utilization, which is, I think, and when we look at the utilizations, we shouldn't really assume that all of this will be filled up to 100%. You need to have buffers, you need to have occasions where some power plant could have outages, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think the shortage is much smaller than what your headline numbers suggest, is the first point. The second point on the SEBs choosing to buy power from state-owned enterprises, NTPC, is I think a serious one, in the sense that they used to be, and this is anecdotal, collusion that was alleged on some of these power purchase agreements. And I think the fact is people are being extraordinarily careful in signing those private PPAs again. But again, if it's a bidding, and so bilateral things I think are now gone. I think there will be auctions, and it's a matter of time, in my view, before you see the medium-term PPA prices, or the 6-month prices, which have reached 6 rupees, as people start to realize that this is actually too expensive. I would rather want to lock in a 3 rupee or a 3.5 rupee power price for the next 15 years. I think it's a matter of time before that starts to happen.
Okay. That only answers part of the problem. If you ask any of the thermal power producers, their problem still is that they have excellent plants of over 21,000 megawatts, which are still languishing because power purchase agreements are not signed, and the regulatory environment clearly favors those companies like NTPC, which have a regulated rate of return for plants built up until 2013. So clearly they're able to bid lower in most of these auctions. That regulatory correction has not yet come. Neelkant and Mr. Dev, thank you very much for joining me. So the key suggestions coming out of the panel is that as commercial mining picks up, we should be able to see more FSAs getting signed, and in course of time, noticing the high price of power purchased at merchant rates, hopefully some more PPAs will be signed, and the scrapping of old plants also could hopefully pick up after the elections. That's it on this edition of Indianomics. Thanks for watching.